Now that we've modeled our picture, let's make a pretty picture of it, which is kind of the fun of working in Modo, actually. So to start with, let's actually add a little bit of an environment here. So let's create a unit primitive. Once again, shift-click on the cube to create a cube item. Then I'll go to Polygon Selection Mode and R for Scale. That's this button right over here, of course, in the basic toolbar. Let's scale this out on the X quite a lot, so we've got plenty of extra to work with. We'll scale it out on the Z a little bit, because we're kind of creating a shelf here, and then scale it down on the Y somewhat. We'll go to the front view using the Control Space Pi menu. We'll go W for move, and just move this down. I'm not even going to bother with snapping in this case, because it really doesn't matter. This is just for giggles anyway. Let's go to perspective view here. And that should be just fine for us. Now we just need to add the wall behind the shelf. So we'll go to create another unit primitive. This time, instead of the cube, though, we're going to click the plane tool. That is the alternate of the tube primitive, actually. So let's hold Shift and click plane. That'll create a unit plane for us. Once again, in polygon selection mode, R for scale, we're going to scale this way on up, just so that it's bigger than our shelf. Then hit E for rotate, or go to the rotate tool in the toolbar and hold the control key while dragging the X rotation handle. That's going to snap us to 15-degree increments as we rotate. And you'll notice over here in the tool properties, it's been snapping us to our various increments. You could also just type in 90 if you prefer to do it numerically. Then we'll hit W for move, and just move this on back so that it's behind the shelf a little bit. I don't want it exactly touching the back of the shelf, because a nice little cast shadow is actually a nice detail that adds a surprising amount of realism to the image. Let's hit Escape to drop that tool, and we're pretty much ready to start rendering. So let's go to our Render tab, brand new territory for us. Now, moving things around in the Render tab is exactly the same as anywhere else. We just hold the Option key or Alt key to rotate, of course, Option and Control to zoom, Alt and Shift to pan, and we can use that to frame our shot however we like. Now, notice a couple of things. There's a couple of nuances here. First of all, you'll notice I'm actually navigating here in the GL viewport, but I could just as easily be doing it up here in the preview viewport as well. That works just fine. You will find that with heavier scenes, often it works better to work in the GL view because it's more responsive, and then just let the preview update whenever it will. In this case, it doesn't matter though. You can really use whichever one you like. The only difference between the two when you're navigating is that by default, this viewport down here at the bottom is set to trackball rotation, so you can bank the view if you want. Whereas a preview viewport, on the other hand, trackball is going to be turned off by default, so everything will stay perfectly vertical if you prefer that. It's just whichever you like. Okay, so I'm going to zoom just to kind of frame this shot. So we've got a basic shot set up. We're not going to need the default directional light. We're going to light everything using indirect lighting from images. So let's select that directional light and hit delete to delete it. And you notice that our scene does not go completely dark. And that is because if we look around in this scene, actually our environment is sort of like I guess sort of an overcast day. We have a white-ish sky, and then down at the bottom we have a very dark ground, and that creates a little bit of a lighting environment for us. And what we want to do is add some image-based lighting to that, so we get different colors of light coming from different directions. So let's open the Preset Browser tab on the bottom here, handy, built into the UI. We'll go to the drop-down at the top, and right now we're looking at Materials. Let's head up here to the top and choose Environments instead. We'll go to our Indoor Environments and find our Kitchen environment. Just double-click it to apply that to our scene, and suddenly we have an image that's lighting our scene. If I rotate the view, you'll see we actually have this kitchen environment wrapping around our scene. We don't have to see it in the background for it to affect the lighting in our scene, and that's the important thing here. We're not going to look at the kitchen per se. We just want to use it for lighting. Now right now, all of that light is coming in from that one window, and that one window happens to be pointing directly at our object, creating a really hot spot right here on the front, which I don't find very pleasing. So let's actually move that around. Let's go to the 3D view here, And if you notice in our items list, when we added our kitchen preset, it added a group locator or a folder into our list. And if we drop that down, we have a texture group, and drop that down, we have a texture locator item. Texture locators do exactly what they sound like. They locate textures. And in this case, the texture in question is that kitchen scene. It's being located using a spherical projection. We can tell that by looking in the texture locator properties here, spherical projection. And we can rotate that using our standard tools. So let's go here to our items selection mode, which once again is number 5 on the keyboard, and hit E for rotate. You'll notice that down here in the viewport, that item, this little sphere, is selected. That is the locator item's representation in 3-dimensional space, and we can rotate that. And as we do, you'll notice our light changing. It's rotating the image, and that is in turn changing our lighting. I want the light to be coming mostly from our left side. I just find that looks very comforting and home-like. And that should work pretty well for us. And to clean up our image a little bit, let's go to the render node in our shader tree. The shader tree contains everything to do with our render and how things are represented in space. At the top level, we have this icon. It's kind of a blue-purple circle next to the word render. That's where all of our render settings are. We have frame settings like the resolution and pixel width and height here, where we could set our aspect ratio and final render size. We have settings for anti-aliasing and that kind of thing. What we want are the global illumination settings here in the GI subtab. We want to set our indirect bounces up to 3 in this case, because when we're dealing only with indirect lighting, we don't have any other lights in our scene, having some extra bouncing really adds to the realism. Another thing we want to do is enable environment importance sampling, which is incredibly powerful and greatly improves the shadow quality when shadows are being cast from image-based lighting. When you're working primarily with lights, like directional lights, spotlights, etc., this is not as relevant. But when you're dealing entirely with environment lighting, this becomes a very powerful option. There is a speed-performance trade-off there. It is a little bit slower than working with only irradiance caching, but it will give us a superior result. Okay, now let's assign some materials. This is where things start to get fun. Let's select our picture just by clicking it, and if you click it in the preview area, you'll notice it selects the item in question, and it also selects whatever material is currently assigned to that item. In this case, the base material. Everything has the same material. With this selected, let's go to polygon selection mode. That's 3 on the QWERTY keyboard. M for material, which is a very common keyboard shortcut. You're going to get very used to that. And let's type in a material name. In this case, I'm going to call it Pitcher. And don't change anything about the default settings. Just hit OK, and that's totally fine. Next, let's go ahead and assign the other materials too. Let's click on the wall. Again, we're in polygon selection mode. M for material. We'll call this our wall material and hit OK. Then we'll click on the shelf. Polygon selection mode, M for material, we'll call this our shelf, and hit OK. Now these all look the same. Ostensibly, our scene hasn't changed much, except if you look in the shader tree, we now have 3 different material groups, one for the shelf, one for the wall, and one for the pitcher, and that's the important thing here. Now we have separate buckets into which we are going to put our material presets. So let's go to our material preset browser. Let's change from environments to materials. And we're going to go to our wood materials down here at the very bottom. Let's find our, let's go to birch. I'm going to grab this polished yellow birch and just drop that onto the shelf. And that's just going to apply the material. That's all there is to it. That's really all you need to do for many materials. You can just drag and drop them. Let's go back to our material drop down. In this case, I'm going to grab a plastic material. Let's go to our medium gloss plastics. Choose a white medium gloss plastic and drag and drop that onto our pitcher. And that's going to serve as our ceramic substitute for the moment. It's a little bit glossier than a ceramic probably would be, but that'll work just fine for us for now. And then finally, on the wall, we really don't need to use a preset per se. Let's just click on the wall. That will select the material in question. So we'll just find that material here and go over to its material properties. Let's change its diffuse color by clicking on the color field right there. I'm just going to drag this a little bit towards the greenish side of things, kind of a minty green color, and maybe make it a little bit darker than just purely bright. And there we go. That pretty much does it. Now, one more thing, totally unnecessary, but just add a little something something to this. Let's go to our camera item. We'll go to our camera effects and enable depth of field. Make sure to click the autofocus button, which is just going to fire a ray out from the center of the camera, find the nearest piece of geometry, and focus on that. We can talk about focusing manually later on. And then change the f-stop to something ridiculously low, way lower than anything in real life, just to make this kind of an extreme effect. Now, that's too much. I've gone way too far. Let's go to 1, f-stop 1. That's actually looking a little bit better. Let's do 0.5. There we go. All right, that looks pretty decent, and I think, again, let's autofocus. That does look, it looks like we're getting in focus, right? And with that, we've created our very first render. Just head up to Render, Render. That's going to pop up the great render window here in Modo and start the rendering process. It's going to move a little bit more slowly than it might otherwise because of two things. One, depth of field is not as fast as not. It does take some time, and also the environment importance sampling is also taking up a little bit of time. But the result should be really nice and well worth the extra render time in most cases. Once the render finishes, we can head over to our image processing tab here, and there's all kinds of post-processing control that we have without even having to go to a retouching program like Photoshop. We can go to our input gray level here and just drag this little handle over to the right of the numeric input to adjust our levels a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of pull down the mids a little bit, and we can pull up the highs some if we want to just kind of heat those up and just bring out this image a little bit more. We can also go up here to the top under vignette amount and increase that, and I find that adding some vignetting to this actually adds to the realism a little bit. It basically darkens the corners somewhat, the way that a real lens would on a camera, and tends to make things look, I don't know, a little bit less CG. And that's it. Okay, so you've created a render. We've modeled something, we've rendered it, and you've seen just how easy that can be. And from here, we can actually jump in and start kind of sinking our teeth into Modo, I think. Okay, so play around, have some fun, definitely take some time to let this stuff soak in before you move on. And then we're going to jump into to the real deal. All right? Have fun. See ya.